Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LEC Summer Split Finals overview and analysis video. We just got the finals yesterday. I'm excited to go over this video. We've covered everything in the playoffs up until this point. You can check out, of course, all of that up in the iCard right now. That's going to be the entire LEC Summer Split playlist if you are interested, but we are here. We have made it the final series of any split here in the LEC. We're going to be closing out summer and getting into the season finals coverage in just a couple of weeks. I'm very excited. I know a lot of you guys are excited as well. It's certainly been an interesting year in the LEC. We'll definitely give a bit of kind of a retrospective at the end of this video because there is a lot to talk about in terms of the LEC right now, just with like the power scaling and everything of it, and you know how good the region in general is looking or not looking. There's a lot to converse about, I would say, generally speaking, with the LEC, so we'll definitely touch on that at the end of the video. But most of this video, of course, will be covering the LEC finals. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game for each individual game that we cover, and at the end of the video, you know, when the series is over, we will be giving a player of the series to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. And of course, like I said, just talking a bit about the region because I do think there are some interesting things to talk about, but I don't want to waste you guys' time too much at the beginning here. There is quite a lot to cover, and I want to get into the content. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. It's, of course, a matchup between the number 4 seeded Fnatic and the number 3 seeded G2 Esports. Fnatic coming in from upper bracket. They have yet to lose a series in the playoffs so far. For the most part in the regular season, they also looked like the best team in the LEC, with the exception of parts of weeks 3 and 4, where they were a bit more shaky, we'll say. The reason that they came in as the 4th seed after being undefeated for a majority of the split is just the lack of consistency at the end, but they seem to have figured something out moving into the playoffs. They played G2 in winners finals, and they were able to come out on top in a 5-game series, and that's massive for Fnatic because they've just not been able to beat this G2 team, this G2 organization in years. It's been at least 4 years. It might even be longer than that. I don't even remember at this point, but Fnatic has really struggled a lot against G2 and really at the top of the standing, so it was really important to see them be able to pick that up. They have the exact same playstyle they've had in recent years. Nothing has particularly changed other than the consistency of it. I think Razork and Humanoid are still the driving forces for what Fnatic wants to do. Razork has been arguably the best jungler in the entire league across this year, and Humanoid has definitely stepped up his consistency, you know, the last week or so, notwithstanding, of course, of the regular season in summer. He's got to have at least 1 week where he's just completely horrible, or else it's not Humanoid. He wouldn't be the same player. I also think the bot lane has gotten significantly better. Jun has been a real emergence, type of player for this team. He's really kind of become one of the more interesting supports in the entire region. Noah has always been a solid AD carry, and I think he's maybe having his most consistent split ever here in summer. Oscar Rinnan, I think, is winning 1v1 more than he has before. There are just a lot of positives to talk about for Fnatic. The concern is that they're facing G2, who has just demolished everybody in their path over the course of this year up until this point, and there's really not a lot of reasons to believe that they can't just run this series as well. They have the best player in the region in Caps. In the mid lane, that's not even up for debate. It's not a conversation in my head. He is clearly the best LEC player right now, and he's the best European player ever. I don't even think we can make that argument anymore. It's just become clearer and clearer. I think Broken Blade is also in relatively good form. He was very good in that previous series against BDS. Yikes had some trouble in the playoffs, but he's also a player that I trust quite a bit, and I think matchup-wise, he actually matches up rather well into Razork, who really struggles when he isn't able to get a lot of early game leads. Yikes very good at being able to establish tempo and pressure. And then Hans and Mickey, they're the more concerning part. Hans, not so much. You kind of know what you're getting with him. He's a really good laner and not a great team fighter. You're just going to have to live with it. Like, that's who he is as a player. He's going to be naturally limited when you're talking about the best AD carries in the world, but at a domestic level, he is somebody that can win finals MVP and, perform really well in the right matchups. Mickey is kind of the turning point for G2. When he plays well, this team is basically unbeatable, but that has not happened all that frequently over the course of this year. There have been way too many games and series where he has just been a bit of a disaster for G2. It does seem like he steps up when it matters the most. He was probably at his best at MSI, but he came back here to the LEC in spring or in summer and just really wasn't good either. So there are real concerns with Mickey X on whether or not you're going to get the good or the bad version, and I'm not really expecting the best out of him in this series, but even without that, G2 might have enough firepower to be able to win this series. Caps really is that good. If you get one of Broken Blade, Yike, or Hansama actually stepping up and looking good alongside Caps, it's probably a wrap. That's probably too much. But Fnatic has already shown that they have the game plan to be able to beat G2. They just have to go out there and execute in the same way that they did in Winners Finals. But are they going to be able to do that? Is G2 going to take this series and become back-to-back champions here? 5 of 6 would be pretty ridiculous ever since the format changed. That's what's on the line here. So a very, very important series, but if we're going to talk about the series as a whole, that means we get to start with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was G2 Esports. They are going to take the first game of this series. They're going to go up 1-0, and they definitely do it in style. It is certainly a bit of an interesting game number 1. G2 with a bit of the comeback here. This was something they struggled with a lot, not only in the Fnatic series, but in a lot of the series that they played over the course of this year, including the BDS series that we just saw in the semifinals, where their early games really are not particularly great right now. That's the biggest concerning thing when it comes to G2, is that honestly their laning has been quite bad from everybody, basically with the exception of Caps, but Humanoid is a phenomenal laner, and so you get these situations where Caps isn't exactly able to dominate in the same way. Hans, who's normally like an expert in that field, who's typically a phenomenal laner, he has not been good. I think Mickey is definitely dragging him down in terms of that early 2v2. Yike's early games have certainly been a bit questionable, which is kind of atypical for him individually as a player. Broken Blade hasn't been a perfect laner. There have just been, it's been a lack of aggressiveness early on from G2, and I think teams have been able to spot that. Unfortunately, the problem for Fnatic is that they just don't really know how to close games. They've never really been super consistent at that as a unit. When you're talking about these players, Razork and Humanoid, they're not exactly the most consistent game enders in the world. Noah is certainly known for some late game mistakes, and so you end up in these situations where even if Fnatic has a lead, you're not necessarily convinced that they're going to be able to hold on to it, and that's exactly what happened here. They should have been able to close out this game really early, and they just weren't able to do that. I think people are going to complain about the Fnatic draft. Anybody who knows me, anybody who's followed the channel for, more than 2 seconds knows I actually love this draft. I think it's a really good one from Fnatic. Jhin is, in my opinion, one of the strongest champions in the game right now, as I've said multiple times. LEC fans will sit there and cry about Jhin being useless, and the reason I can say with such confidence that Jhin is so strong is because I do watch the LPL and the LCK, and trust me, when you watch 50 plus games per week in the LPL, you realize very quickly that when Jhin wins, he wins harder than any other champion in the entire game at the current moment. The way he can shut down an enemy team comp is quite frankly unplayable against, especially if you pair it with extra damage. Things like Karthus, things like Zyra, as we saw here. Renekton has been a pretty popular pair up. Lucian is something that I think obviously you can play it with. There is real danger to Jhin right now that LEC fans just for some reason or another, as I've tweeted out multiple times, just can't wrap their head around. They just cannot understand that Jhin is strong, and trust me, Jhin had his successes in this game. If you go and watch the tape, Jhin as a champion was doing way more than Noah as the player was doing. So we'll talk about that when we get more to Fnatic, but I wanted to kind of nip that in the bud before we started this off, because I think, draft is such a hot commodity and LEC fans will blame draft at any given opportunity. I don't think it was a draft gap. I think G2, quite frankly, just outperformed them in the late game, and a lot of that is going to go to Hans Sama, and that is a sentence I'm really excited to say. He's going to get player of the game here in game number 1, and the fact that it is for his team fighting and not so much for his early 2v2s is very important. Hans has always been, quite frankly, just not a very good team fighter. He doesn't really understand how to play safe in a lot of these fights and ends up getting caught out pretty early. It's kind of translated into this style where he wants to snowball games as hard as possible, but you sit in a position here as Ezreal and you realize you're not going to be able to get this strong early lead. It's not really a meta where bot lane's getting a lot of resources, which is why things like Ezreal and Jhin are such high priority, but if you can stick around, you've got a Corki, you've got a Sedge, you've got a Kennen, a Poppy, you've got a lot of tools to be able to win these fights, and that's exactly what Hans did. He never really got too far behind, and he was able to capitalize. Now, Mickey was a bit of a different story, was getting caught out quite a bit in the mid game. For the most part, the Poppy still ended up being very useful in the back half. Just generally, that champion is always going to be good, but Mickey didn't have a perfect game. Yike also didn't have a perfect game. He's really been inconsistent, over the course of this playoff run. He has concerned me. The last, month or so, he's not been particularly good in the jungle, so we'll see if that ends up continuing, but something to note. Caps continues to look awesome. He's the best Corki in the LEC, and it's not close. Broken Blade was also generally fine. Didn't make any major mistakes, and I think that's all he really needed to do into this Renekton matchup. The R5 Kennen, I do think, was positive for the team, but Hans was definitely the one who stood out, and this was an 80 carry gap. Do not get it twisted. Noah was not good here. He's not going to get dud of the game. I very much consider considered him for it, but Jhin was doing so much individually as a champion, was attributing so much to the early success of what Fnatic did, and Noah is just so bad at playing Jhin. Like, there really is no other way to say it. He clearly is not very comfortable on the champion, and more specifically, Fnatic as a team is clearly not very comfortable trying to play around Jhin. He's not the kind of carry that you can put all these resources on and then eventually expect him to be self-sufficient. It's not really what happens with Jhin. You have to play around the traps, you have to play around the stuns. If you do that, if you have a good coordinated game plan and you can layer CC and things like that, it's basically impossible to play against. We've seen that in the LPL with Jhin having like a 70-something win percentage. Like, he's genuinely obliterating that region, but when you don't play around him, yeah, some of his flaws are going to get exposed. And so Noah not being a particularly good Jhin player was very much on display here. My dud of the game, unfortunately, though, is going to go to Oscarinin in the top lane. I just don't think the Renekton was very useful here. Getting counterpicked R5 by the Kennen is certainly a bit of a problem, but there are a lot of avenues for Renekton to stay relevant in this game, and he just didn't use any of them. He wasn't playing with the Zyra or the Lucian. He wasn't trying to do these big flanks to negate what Kennen wanted to do, or even just try to stop Kennen, like just find Kennen in a fight and really kind of take him out of it. It really felt like Oscarinin was just kind of passively playing the game, and that's a very bad place to be in the finals. Like, that's really not the kind of gameplay you want to see. Razork was basically gifted a free early jungle clear, and he still didn't utilize it to really do all that much. Jun was fine. Humanoid was actively trying his best to trade 1-for-1 and gain as much gold as possible, but the problem is that you have to trust as Humanoid that you're the best player in the game to do that. If you're trading with Caps and Yike and Hans, it's not going to work out every single time. Your AD carry wasn't there, your top laner wasn't there, you didn't have any backup, and that ended up being a bit of a problem for Fnatic. So them dropping game number 1, I think, is generally fine. Typically speaking, G2 actually performs pretty poorly in game 1s, and so I was a bit surprised to see G2 come back and win this, if only from a historical perspective, but, you know, they're a very good team. Fnatic has to get on the board now, though. If you go down 2-0 to G2 in the finals, it's basically a death sentence. Having to win 3 in a row against that team is miserable. So a very important game number 2 here from Fnatic. Are they going to be able to tie up the series, or is G2 going to take a dominating 2-0 series lead? Well, the winner of game number 2 was G2. They are going to take G2, game number 2 here. They're going to go up in the series 2-0, and second verse, same as the first. You know, we're getting another Fnatic winning the early game, being able to do absolutely nothing about it, and then eventually losing. I think, obviously, drafting Renekton Lucian definitely is a bit of that problem. They don't necessarily scale into these front-to-back team fights as consistently as some other top mid-lane duos, but at the end of the day, like, you have to win these games. These are unlosable games if you are Fnatic. I would argue that this one is even worse, not only from Fnatic's side, but from G2's side, where they looked awful in the early game. They looked completely inept in terms of how to play out their early laning phases. It doesn't really seem like they understand champion interactions in this current meta, which is very odd. Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, what are we practicing in scrims? Because this felt like a scrim. This felt like, I'm drafting the Corki Lucian matchup, and I don't feel super comfortable on it, but, I want to get some experience. I'm playing Ornn into Renekton. I've played it 1,000 times, but I'm going to play it really slow. I'm not exactly sure what the interactions are between these two champions. What are we doing? Like, this is such a weird game to end up trying to analyze. I don't think Fnatic or G2 played particularly well, but at least G2 was able to win some team fights, and to that, I give them credit. Caps is the faker of the West. At this point, he even has the global taunt. It is very funny how when you are the best player in a region, when you are so overwhelmingly famous in terms of your accomplishments in pro, you just immediately become everyone's priority target in every major game. Caps had that faker syndrome here where everybody was just out to get him, and they were feeding him free kills. They were feeding his teammates free kills in order to continue pushing forward. He's going to get player of the game for it. Faker's gotten 1 billion of these, and Caps gets another one here. So it's really interesting to just kind of see the dynamic of finding a player that you think is really good and doing everything you can to try and shut him down, and in the process enabling him to be the best player in the game. It's a very, very funny cycle. I also want to give a big shout out to Hansama. What a brutal game to play Jhin. Like, what a brutal game. What a brutal game plan from Fnatic to just try to take this Jhin out. Your support was running it the entire game when Mickey X. Like, shout out to the Jhin. Shout out to Hansama, who did everything he was supposed to in this game. He's not like player of the game worthy, but he certainly is somebody that, he had a good game, and he's having a really good series right now. Yike and Broken Blade I also thought were more consistent. Not perfect. Again, they had their early game problems. Brand generally is going to have that into the Zyra matchup, or at least that's what I would anticipate. But I think generally G2 just kind of waited it out, did what they were supposed to, got to the part of the game where Brand could throw an ultimate on someone right in the middle of an Ornn ultimate, and then you have Corki just doing all the damage. I think that's a pretty good game plan, even if I really need to see this team actually do something in the early game to ever believe that they are going to be able to compete at a higher level than this. And then for Fnatic, what do you want me to say? Like, this team is so unclinical. Like, that is really the only way to put it. They are the most volatile team I've ever seen get this far into something like the LEC. They have such great mechanics and fundamentals, and they have absolutely nothing beyond that. At least the version of them that is here right now is that. And it's so strange to watch because this game should have been unlosable. Like, in every facet, this game should have been unlosable, and yet here we are. They have lost it. Oscar Rinnan's going to get the dud of the game once again. Noah was once again in consideration. I know it's becoming a bit of a trend for these two players to not play particularly well in big moments, and I think that's a very unfortunate spot to be in. It's a big reason why I'm a bit lower on them individually, but Oscar was bad. Once again on the Renekton, he did literally nothing. I guess he was a bit more active in this game, but it was to his detriment rather than being to his team's positive. And then Noah just is not here right now. On both sides of the Jhin Ezreal matchup, he seems to not really understand what he's supposed to be doing in the late game and ends up getting caught out. The team either just doesn't want to play around him or he is not connected with everybody else. There is some problem right now. Noah has not been like this for a majority of this split. And so to see him really not play well in a pretty pivotal moment is not ideal. Jhin was definitely worse here in game 2 than he was in game 1. That's definitely going to be a part of the story, but at the end of the day, Noah and Oscar have to play better. There is no exceptions. This is the finals. Humanoid continues to look great. He was even better in this game, in my opinion. And then Razork, he was pretty solid. I do want to see him prioritize objectives a bit more aggressively. Sometimes he can just allow G2 to have free things, and there are points in the game where Fnatic's like up 10k gold and they're trading. It's like, what are we doing? Like, why are we going 1-for-1 on objectives or on towers or things like that? Like, why are we trading across the map when you should be getting everything? You're so dominantly in the lead. It's just a very crazy thing to talk about, but Fnatic's now in the hole. They're down 0-2. They're sitting in a position where they have, they're likely to get swept if they don't figure something out. If they play like they did here, it doesn't really matter how good your early games are if you have no idea how to close, and so they need to get their act together. G2 is one game away from sweeping their 4th finals in a row, their 5th of their last 6th. Are they going to be able to do it in a 3-0 sweep, or is Fnatic going to be able to fight back and win their first game of this series? Well, the winner of game number 3 was G2 Esports. They are going to take game number 3. They are going to close out this series with a 3-0 sweep. And your 2024 Summer Split Champions are, once again, G2 Esports. That's Summer of 2024, Spring of 24, Winter of 24, Summer of 23, Winter of 23. That's 5 of the 6 most recent finals that are in favor of G2, and also it's 5 of the 6 of the new format. It's basically all of the new format finals have been won by G2 with the exception of that weird Mad Lions win in spring of last year. This has been utter domination. I don't know if we've ever seen a team dominate the top European league in the way that G2 is able to do right now. And my problem is that I don't know if it's because G2 is that good. I think they're a good team, don't get me wrong. And trust me, I think this team will get better as they, start to go to international events and start to take things a bit more seriously. But this is the weakest that they have looked in the past 2 years, and they still won 3-0. And that's really not a good sign for the rest of the league. We'll talk about Fnatic in a second. This game is literally the exact same as the first 2, a gigantic lead, even larger than the first 2 games, like a 10, 11k gold lead, it was like a 4k gold lead on the Renekton. It was like a 2k gold lead on the Ezreal. Like, this was unlosable. Truly, I can't stress that enough. This was an unlosable game for a team that had any semblance of understanding of how to play the late game, and they just couldn't do it. They end up falling, and they deserve it. They deserve to get swept here. Fnatic deserves it. Does G2 deserve a 3-0 win? Absolutely not. They did not play well today, but yet they walk out as the champions. I think they were trying to throw it to Fnatic. I honestly have a theory that they cared so little about this trophy after having won so many over the past couple of years that they weren't even trying in this game, but I don't actually have any way to prove that. The only proof I have is the gameplay for G2 in this series. I am going to go a little bit against the grain here. Player of the game in game number 3 is going to go to Hansama, and he's also going to get my finals MVP. I think Caps was a very easy choice because he's Caps and because he is the best player on this team, but I would think that Hans was more valuable and was more important to G2's success success today. I thought he was the best player on the Rift across all 3 of these games, was super great in the back half, did a great job of absorbing pressure, even when he did have to give over gold leads in the early game. He's playing Kai'Sa into Ezreal. He's not exactly going to win that matchup. He was behind early in basically all 3 games, but somehow, some way he stayed relevant, and he was really important to all 3 of their wins. And so, yeah, Hans is going to get Finals MVP. I think his performance is the most indicative of G2, where the early games were bad, but it didn't matter because he was able to win late. So credit to Hans. I thought he played really well in this series. Caps obviously does deserve a lot of positives. The Corki was excellent throughout the entirety of this series. He had a much easier job because all of these games were basically free for him to win so long as he was actually playing these fights correctly, which of course it's Caps, he was. So credit to him, but Caps and Hans definitely the standout members. Broken Blade, Yike, Mickey, they were along for the ride. They had their own problems in the early game. Yike is definitely still concerning. Mickey X is still definitely concerning in terms of the performances that they put out. But at the end of the day, if your carries are going to play like this, and if Fnatic is going to play like this, then yeah, it's going to be a pretty easy 3-0 win. But for Fnatic on the other side, it's just a disaster. I mean, there is nothing to say. This is an unequivocal disaster for Fnatic. They had everything in the palm of their hands, and they threw it all in the trash. They had a full championship. The trophy was in their hands, and they just decided to chuck it against the wall. And I really can't understand what possibly happened to this team. This is not how they played for a majority of this year, but you know, dead of the game goes to everyone. Like, truly, it should go to everyone. I'm giving it to Razork because he was individually the worst, I would say, in terms of his performance. The brand was awful. That's a champion that should really thrive from such a large advantage, being able to play through a strong Renekton and a strong Ezreal, and he just chose not to. He, again, chose to trade everywhere on the map. That was even worse here in Game 3 than it was in Game 2. You're up 10k gold and you're trading 1 tower for 1 tower? What are we doing? Like, I can't possibly understand the shot calling of this Fnatic team. Humanoid had his worst game of the series here. 3 games of Lucian that progressively probably got worse. Noah just, I mean, look at the scoreline. It looks real good. He had like 5 kills gifted to him at 10 minutes into the game and then did literally nothing with them for the rest of it. He is just not the kind of player that can be like the carry on a championship winning team. I'm sorry. He is proven at this point that that is not who he is. Oscar also had a ridiculous gold lead. He wasn't nearly as horrendous in the back half of this game, but Renekton fell off predictably, and Jun, you know, tried his best to do something, but even the jungle mid duo was really underperforming in Game 3, and so there's just nothing else left to say. Their team fighting is so atrocious. The good thing for Fnatic is that they were able to get such large leads so consistently in this series, but it means nothing if you can't do anything with them, so Fnatic is done here. They're going to have a chance to figure things out before going into the season finals, but G2, they're going into the season finals just as essentially a proving grounds, because just like the rest of the year, they have nothing to earn left. By winning the summer split here, G2 is officially qualified for Worlds. 2024 Worlds is at the very least going to have G2. This is not a surprise. They are the second team globally to qualify, only behind Gen G, who qualified by making the playoffs because they won MSI. So congratulations to G2. We'll see if they can fix some of their mistakes. Part of me thinks this is just them not taking the league very seriously, and I honestly think that's a pretty realistic outcome. They were good at MSI. They were pretty good at the Esports World Cup. I'm not going to sit here and say that I expect G2 to flame out and for the LEC to just be horrendous and for G2 to not be able to hold their own at an international tournament, but my concern is that G2 probably took this series very lightly, wasn't trying 100%, and still ended up 3-0ing. That's the concern. It's not G2, it's the rest of the league. So congratulations to G2. I think they're going to be just fine so long as they're locked in for the international tournament, but they really do have to shore up those early games. That wasn't just a problem against Fnatic, that was a problem against BDS in the semifinals as well. So congratulations to G2, but a lot of negative thoughts as well. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LEC Summer Split Finals overview and analysis video. We are done with the regular season section of the LEC this year. We know the teams that have made it into the season finals. Don't worry, we're going to have an entire separate video that goes over my predictions for the season finals, what teams I think are going to do well, and what teams I think will end up finishing top 3 in order to qualify for the World Championships. In that video, I will also be going over my yearly awards, my yearly MVP, me for the LEC, my yearly Rookie of the Year, my yearly top 3 All-Pro teams, all of that stuff is going to be listed there, of course, as well as an overview of every single team. So I'm excited to get into that. I hope you guys are as well, but let me know if you agree or disagree with my pessimism surrounding the LEC right now in the comments. I just don't know if this is a region that is strong outside of G2. This really does feel like a one-team region at the moment. Let me know if you agree or disagree with that assessment down below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LEC, especially with it wrapping up here. We post about all 4 of the major regions every single week. That's the LCS, LEC, LCK, and the LPL every single week on this channel. We also post about the NACL Tier 2 over in North America every single week. So if you're interested in a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all